I returned to Aunt May's funeral and saw that there were 20 of their houses standing right on our land. The chairman of their council and the developer pretended for years that everything was clean, hid her letters, and waved a fake piece of paper. But my trump card, a folder with receipts, old papers, a map of the borders, and a video from a drone, lay down on the table and stopped them. At that moment, everything turned upside down. The faces turned pale. The hall became quiet. What happened next? The flight banked over a scrim of mountains and a grid of dark pine, and for a second the whole subdivision flashed like a coin in the sun. 20 neat roofs stitched into a hillside I'd grown up hearing about but hadn't seen since childhood. My aunt had called it the North Pasture, though no one pastured anything up there anymore. By the time the wheels bit the runway, the text from the realtor had already arrived. Condolences, keys, address of the probate attorney. No one mentioned the cabins. No one had to. From the air, they were impossible to miss. I rented a compact SUV and drove straight to the courthouse because grief and curiosity share a border. The county seat was a low building with a clock that had stopped at 11:42, as if time itself had never forgiven the switch to digital. The county recorder's office smelled like paper the way a forge smells like iron. I asked for the deed to parcel 14A and slid over my driver's license and the probate letter. The clerk, a woman with a pencil through her bun, spun her monitor toward me. "There," she said, tapping the screen with the pencil. "Warranty deed recorded May 14th, 1998, book 402, page 177. May Carver, a single woman, grantor to herself and her heirs, as to an undivided fee simple, meets and bounds description. Also an earlier quitclaim from 79 cleaning up a fence line with the neighboring lot 21. She printed the pages and the stamps bloomed like bruises. Recording requested by, returned to, received, recorded. The legal description ran like a piece of old scripture. A rectangle, 40 acres, the North Pasture. "Do you have the most recent subdivision plat?" I asked. The pencil traveled to another drawer. She pulled out a rolled map and a magnifier. "Pine Trail Cabins Phase 1, she read. "Recorded 2019, 20 short-term rental units, private roads, drainage easements. See here, lots 1 through 20. The plat showed a tidy cul-de-sac and little boxes stacked like souvenirs. The whole thing sat with a flourish of calligraphy just south of a thin line labeled End Pasture Boundary per 1998 deed. "Per the deed," I said. She shrugged. "The plat is what the developer recorded. Doesn't mean it's right." "Who checked it?" "Recorded instruments are not warrants of correctness," she recited, like a catechism. "That's what courts are for." The assessor's GIS map on the public computer was even less coy. Parcel 14. A shaded green with a click, and the cabins lay inside it like teeth in a mouth. Parcel lines hummed under satellite imagery, coordinates marching to the beat of a surveyor no one had summoned in 25 years. I printed the screen with the blue dot of my current location creeping along the county network. By the time I drove the gravel road, the air had gone slate with afternoon. A galvanized chain draped across the entrance with a laminated sign, "Private Community, HOA Access Only." A keypad hung from a post like a metal fruit. Beyond it, the cabins stepped up the slope in regimented rows, steel roofs, decks, hot tubs, string lights. A couple took selfies under a neon-scripted Pine Trail sign portable enough to be a joke, if not for the dead serious padlocks on every utility panel. A white pickup rolled up, amber beacon blinking. The driver's door opened, and a man with mirrored sunglasses and a crisp polo with the HOA logo stepped out, holding a clipboard. "Afternoon," he said. "Guests only pass the gate. Rental code required." "I'm not a guest," I said. "I'm the landowner." He smiled the way you smile at a person you're about to tiptoe around. "We get that a lot. Folks like the views. The cabins are part of Pine Trail's common interest community." "Which sits on my aunt's parcel," I said. "May Carver. She passed last month. I'm her heir." "Sorry for your loss," he said, like a line read from a manual. "But this is private property." I set the manila folder on the hood of my SUV and flipped it open. Deed, assessor's parcel map, tax receipts with my aunt's name, and the parcel number, APN 0460140000. A copy of the letter the county had sent her every year. Taxes due, then paid, stamped in red. A screenshot of the GIS with blue dots showing cabins where cattle once stood. "It's not just private property," I said. "It's this private property." He didn't look down. He kept his eyes behind his sunglasses, as if they were federally protected. "If you have questions, the board meets on the second Tuesday. The president will be happy to address your concerns at the proper time." "I'll be at the proper time," I said. And I'll bring proper documents. He lifted the chain as if to signal a line between worlds. I slid the folder back into my pack. Bring anything you want, he said, but do not trespass. We have cameras. He tapped a sign that warned of prosecution and a $500 fine. On the way back to town, I stopped at the old farmhouse because grief obeys its own speed limit. Every surface had my aunt's handwriting on it. In the pantry, behind a dozen jars of peaches and a single jar labeled Early Frost, I found the cigar box with the keys to the safe. The safe sat behind coats in the hall closet. Inside, a spiral notebook with receipts taped in chronological procession. Fence posts, a survey in 1998, a bill from a lawyer for review of deed language, a letter from a developer in 2018 with the subject line opportunity, and my aunt's reply in blue pen, no thank you. Please do not contact me again. Then a string of certified mail receipts, green cards clipped together like scales. She had protested. She had sent letters. She had gotten nothing but silence and the humming growth of cabins on a hill. I slept on the couch with the folder as heavy as a sandbag on my chest. In the morning, I called 3 surveyors. The first 2 were booked out until fall. The third listened, said the name Carver like an old song, and agreed to meet me at noon at the fence line. He came in a tan hat and steel tape with a tripod that could have walked away on its own legs. He listened while his instruments watched. He took my deed and measured not with what the plat asked, but with what the earth had agreed to long ago. Stone at the northeast corner, a scar of iron in the grass at the section line, a witness post forgotten by everyone but Sun and Frost. Meets and bounds like this don't lie, he said, leveling the scope. They can be argued, but they don't lie. Can a recorded plat overrule a deed? A plat can memorialize a lie as easily as a truth. That's why God created quiet title actions. He drove a lathe stake and painted it fluorescent. In the distance, a cabin's deck ringed with tourists glowed with tiki bulbs. He checked bearings again. I'll get you a preliminary exhibit by tomorrow, he said. An Alta NSPS survey in a week if the courthouse cooperates. You'll want the title company too. Chase the chain back 50 years. See who thought they were clever. I went to the title office and asked for a commitment. The manager, a woman with a bob cut sharp enough to cut a ribbon, thumbed through the instruments as if they were ledger entries to a ghost's account. There's a cloud, she said after 20 minutes. In 2018, the developer recorded a boundary line agreement between his holding company and... She slid a page closer. May Carver, except there's no signature from May, just the developers. And the notary block is odd. I looked. It was odd, and more. The notary name was a man who, according to a quick Google search, had died in 2017. The stamp date said June 2018. People make mistakes on stamps, the manager said. We don't allege fraud. We document anomalies. Document this one, I said. On the way out, I paused at a corkboard with business cards and a flyer for a drone operator who specialized in real estate. I took the tab with the phone number. That afternoon, a kid with a buzz cut and calm hands piloted a whirring camera into the sky over the cabins while we stood by the fence. The screen on his controller showed parcel lines like green threads stitched to the hill. We recorded coordinates, took stills with the survey stakes visible, and overlaid the Alta-based drawing the surveyor had emailed. The cabins were inside parcel 14A and not by a hair, by 100 feet in places. At 7 that evening, the HOA met in a community room with a coffee urn that hissed like a cat. People took seats, men in branded fleece, women in puffer vests, a couple of kids on tablets. A banner on the wall read, Pine Trail Annual Meeting. The president stood at the front with a gavel he could have bought on the internet. His sunglasses parked on top of his head like a second pair of eyes. Call to order, he said. Approval of minutes. Treasurer's report. When he asked for new business, I stood. I'm here on behalf of the record owner of Parcel 14A, I said. My aunt, and now by probate, me. We recognize you, he said. You'll have 3 minutes. I'll take 2, I said. I set the folder on the table, opened it so the stamps caught the light, and slid a copy of the deed to him, another to the secretary, and a third to a woman in the second row who looked like the only person taking actual notes. These cabins, I said, gesturing to the photos on the projector of the plat he'd chosen to show off at the start, are built inside Parcel 14A. I have the deed, the assessor's records, a current survey. I have correspondence my aunt sent you before construction. I have certified mail receipts. I have an Altia surveyor willing to testify. I have drone imagery and GIS overlays. Sir, he said, gavel twitching, this community was built by a reputable developer. All permits were obtained. The county approved the plat. The county recorded the plat, I said. Recording is a ministerial act. It is not a warranty of correctness. Your cabins are on land you do not own. Murmurs. A woman in the back asked if that meant her rental calendar needed to be canceled. A man with a ball cap said something about adverse possession and was immediately shushed by a lawyerly-looking person beside him. Even if, the president said, and I'm not conceding anything, even if some boundary issue existed, this is a civil matter between you and the developer. The HOA is not a party. I slid a copy of the covenants, conditions, and restrictions, the CC&Rs, toward him, flagged with tabs. Your CC&Rs define the common interest community as the lots within the recorded plat and any property annexed in accordance with Article 12. Parcel 14A was never annexed. Your board knowingly ignored letters from my aunt who warned you before construction. You recorded a boundary agreement with a dead notary stamp and without her signature. And then you recorded your CC&Rs. That makes the HOA a party. He glanced at the gavel, as if it might switch to a shield. We aren't going to litigate here. Correct, I said. We'll litigate in court. Tonight, I'm here to put you on notice. Tomorrow, I'll record a list pendants against every cabin, so that your owners and lenders know this title is in dispute. Rentals will stop until we resolve this. I am willing to discuss a boundary line adjustment, a ground lease, or a buyout. I am not willing to pretend this didn't happen. He tried the gavel finally, and the sound wasn't as powerful as he hoped. We'll take your comments under advisement. Take my documents too, I said. They're better at advising. On my way out, 3 owners stopped me in the hallway. One asked if this would affect her refinance. One asked if she should call her bank before or after she canceled next month's bookings. The third, the woman from the second row with the notes, asked if I had counsel. You need a litigation firm that understands real estate, she said. Not the folks who do closings and smile at ribbon cuttings. You need someone who enjoys footnotes and injunctions. I thought those were opposites, I said. In the right hands, they're the same thing. I thanked her and went home and scanned every page into a folder called Receipts. Then I made 3 backups, because fear and prudence share a spine. The last thing I did before the day ended was address 3 envelopes with the HOA's registered agent, the developer's last known office, and the county attorney. Inside each, I placed a copy of the deed, the preliminary survey, and a letter that said, plainly, you have built 20 structures on land my aunt owned and I now own. Stop representing to owners, lenders, and renters that the cabins sit within your plat. Contact me within 10 days to discuss remedy. I sent them certified return receipt requested. Green cards because ghosts deserve signatures too. The first call came from a number with a big city area code and a voice full of velvet and glass. Counsel for the HOA, he said. He sounded the way elevators in premium buildings sound. We understand you may have some concerns, he said. The board is committed to community harmony. Are you committed to reading legal descriptions? I asked. We're committed to moving forward. I'm committed to not being robbed. He suggested an amicable meeting. I suggested they stop renting the cabins while we worked out boundaries. He called that unreasonable. I called it avoiding ongoing trespass. He suggested that if I persisted, the board would consider fines for trespass against the common area and seek a restraining order. I suggested that if he persisted, I would seek a temporary restraining order and preliminary injunction, halting all rentals and construction pending adjudication. And I would add a claim for slander of title if they kept telling banks everything was fine. We agreed to disagree and hung up. I hired a lawyer who smiled at footnotes. Her office had books that were actually read and a bowl of peppermints that smelled faintly of deadlines. I handed her the folder. She paged through with a highlighter in one hand and a pencil in the other, writing in the margins like a conductor annotating a score. Claims, she said, as if telling a story. Quiet title against all who claim an interest. Ejectment against improvement owners. Trespass. Nuisance for noise and lights on your land. Slander of title if they keep lying. Fraud and forgery allegations reserved. We don't shout that without discovery. Preliminary injunction to stop rentals. If they run the cabins, that's continuing irreparable harm. List pendants to put the world on notice. Motion for a receiver to collect rents during litigation to prevent dissipation. We'll need the surveyor's declaration, the title officer's anomaly memo, drone exhibits with coordinates, and a declaration from you with the chain of tax payments. You pay taxes? My aunt did, I said. Here are 25 years of receipts. She arranged them in a fan. Courts love taxes. They're like holy water. We filed. The complaint read like a family tree and a yard sale had a child. Party names, parcel numbers, prayer for relief. The clerk stamped it with the same bruising authority as the deed. The next day, the list pendens hit the records. Realtors emailed each other like birds in a storm. One lender froze closings. An owner posted on Nextdoor that a disgruntled local was trying to destroy the community. Another posted the GIS screenshot and asked if anyone had a measuring tape. The board called an emergency meeting and announced they were exploring options. They sent owners an email explaining I was mistaken and that the developer had assured them everything was in order. They attached the boundary line agreement with my aunt's printed name above a signature line no ink had ever touched, and they blew up the notary stamp so big that the dead date screamed like a whistle. In the reply, all labyrinth of several dozen owners, someone finally asked, "So why didn't you answer her letters?" No one from the board replied. In court, the judge who took the case wore reading glasses low and listened the way some people listen to waterfalls. My lawyer stood and spoke in a voice like a level plane. She did not spit. She did not shout. She laid out stones you could walk on. Your Honor, the land is defined by deed and survey, not a plat's wishful thinking. The HOA recorded a plat that intrudes inside our meets and bounds. The developer attempted, after my client's aunt refused to sell, to record a boundary line agreement without her signature and with an invalid notary block. The cabins are operating short-term rentals on land they do not own, producing nightly trespasses and financial harm. We request a TRO and preliminary injunction, halt rentals, bar further construction, prohibit representations of ownership, and require all rents to be deposited in the court registry or with a receiver pending final resolution. They argued like people who had lost the facts but retained confidence. They waived permits. Permits, my lawyer reminded the court, are not deeds. They argued that the county recorded the plat. Recording is ministerial, she said. The clerk does not survey. They argued that the HOA was an innocent party. Then she held up the certified mail green cards my aunt had saved, a fan of small government slips with signatures. The room went quiet, and the gavel was unnecessary. The judge granted most of what we asked. Rentals paused. New bookings were canceled. He appointed a receiver to collect any ongoing income and hold it in an account subject to the court's later orders. He ordered expedited discovery, which is the legal term for show me your homework right now. He set a mediation date and told both sides to arrive with someone who could say yes. The days that followed smelled like toner and coffee. We took depositions. The developer was a man who could sell ice to a glacier so long as he paid the glacier's attorney. Under oath, he admitted he had approached my aunt, that she had declined, that he had then assumed the boundary could be regularized later. He could not explain the notary stamp discrepancy. Our title officer explained anomalies in careful words. The surveyor explained stones and lines and how you can lie on paper, but not on the ground. The HOA president insisted the board had relied on professionals and had never knowingly trespassed. My lawyer asked why they ignored certified letters. He said he didn't recall receiving them. She slid the green cards across the table until the edges of his denial began to fray. While the adults spoke in rooms with microphones, the town spoke in rooms with coffee. A local paper ran a story with a photo of my aunt in her garden and the cabins behind her, a kind of double exposure of memory and mistake. Owners reached out quietly, some angry at me, most angry at the board. A few drove out to the fence and stood with hands in pockets, looking at stakes like gravestones. One handed me a thermos of coffee and said his wife cried each night reading the court emails. We didn't know, he said. We just wanted a place to bring the kids. We didn't think about the dirt under the deck. I had thought about little else. Memory has a way of moving in once the spare room is empty. I remembered my aunt telling me, when I was 10 and bloody-kneed from climbing the split rail, that lines mattered because people forgot, not because the earth did. The earth will always remember, she had said. We need tools to remind us. We gathered tools. A historian from the County Historical Society found the original survey notes from the 1890s, written in pencil on paper as thin as a moth's wing. The bearings matched. We found a photo of my grandfather standing with a surveyor at the northeast corner stone in 1962, the same stone we had found under a tuft of grass. We found in the developer's email cache a message from a consultant warning that the north boundary may present conflicts with an existing deed. The consultant had been dropped from the project 2 weeks later. Mediation was scheduled in a hotel conference room where the carpet had an alarming pattern of lilies that looked like they were screaming. The mediator was one of those retired judges who could charm a cat. He put us in separate rooms and shuffled between them with a yellow pad and a smile that felt like leverage. You can always go to trial, he said, and you might even win big. But trials are boxing. Mediation is chess. I like boxing, I said. Lots of clean rules. Juries like stories, he said. Yours is good. But the HOA owners have stories too. That's why we're here, to write an ending that doesn't burn the town down. The first offer from the other side was insult disguised as compromise. A token payment, a plaque on a rock, a promise to plant trees. We countered with arithmetic and gravity, fair market value of a ground lease for the footprint and buffer of each cabin, compounded for past trespass. Option for my election to eject and remove at the HOA's expense for any cabin not brought into. Long-term lease. A buyout price for the entire parcel if they wished to unify, at a premium that reflected the fact that they had placed a set of assets atop a thing they didn't own. Plus costs, plus fees, plus a public acknowledgement of the boundary. Issue and a rescission of the forged boundary document. The mediator returned with a look that said the other room had discovered the weight of the word plus. He went back and forth. Lunch came and left. We drank coffee and told the clock to hush. By evening, we had a framework, an immediate payment into the court's registry equal to 2 years of reasonable ground rent for each cabin's footprint and an agreed buffer area. A 15-year ground lease for each affected cabin with rent indexed to CPI and escalators, renewable at my option, a survey-based boundary line adjustment recorded to reflect the leaseholds. An admission in a recorded instrument that the 2018 boundary document was invalid and rescinded. Attorney's fees reimbursed. The receiver to release funds to me as rent once the leases were recorded. And a purchase option I could force as to any cluster at a set price per cabin if the board ever breached. The developer agreed to contribute a large share of the initial payment. The HOA agreed to a special assessment for the rest. Several owners grimaced and said words people say when reality calls in a debt. The board president looked at the mediator as if he had hoped the lilies could swallow him. We weren't done. One more term, I said, when the mediator looked ready to throw his pen into the air like a dove. A public meeting where the board tells the owners what happened. Not in legalese, in English. The recording of that meeting will be posted on the website. No more calling me a disgruntled local. Use my name. Is revenge a term? The mediator asked gently. Clarity is, I said. He nodded. Clarity is enforceable. The judge approved the settlement framework and kept jurisdiction to enforce. The receiver smiled at the thought of issuing checks rather than building a nest egg for a war. The title company drafted leasehold memoranda that read like love letters between reluctant parties. We scheduled a date to replat the boundary adjustments once the leases were recorded, so that the plat would match the deed, not the other way around. The county recorder, who had seen all kinds of corrections, cleared a space on her counter for a neat stack of documents with colored tabs that made them look like a rainbow was being fed into the archives. The room was full before the start. An owner held a toddler in one arm and a binder in the other. A couple near the front wore matching sweatshirts with their cabin's name on it. A local reporter arranged a small camera on a tripod. The board sat with their paper name placards standing like tiny gravestones of good intentions. I stood in the back because it is easier to leave if you never sit. The board president cleared his throat and found his courage in the middle of his prepared remarks. We believed, he said, that the developer had resolved a boundary issue with a neighbor. That belief was mistaken. The cabins were built in part on parcel 14A, which we did not own. The owner of 14A raised the issue many times. We did not respond adequately. We placed our faith in recorded instruments that proved invalid. We apologize. He looked up. No one clapped. Applause does not know how to find apologies. He explained the settlement terms. The words special assessment bounced around the room like a pinball hit too hard. A man in a camo hat said it wasn't fair. A woman said fairness had fled the moment someone cut the first pad and poured the first footer on a neighbor's land. Another woman asked if she could sell in the middle of all this. The lawyer at the end of the board table explained leaseholds and disclosures and how anyone could sell any day if the price was right, which is different from saying anyone should. The mediator had been right. Stories were everywhere, perched on every chair. The couple who refinanced last month, the guy who built a deck with his dad, the woman who had married the place when her marriage fell apart. When it was my turn, I walked to the front and slid a stack of color copies onto the table. Deed, old survey, the Alta showings, photos of the boundary stone with my grandfather beside it. A scan of my aunt's note from 2018 where she had written in neat blue pen, "No thank you. Please do not contact me again." I didn't need a microphone. The room was less than 100 souls and almost as many opinions. I'm not here to win, I said, and a few people snorted because they thought winning and money were synonyms. I'm here because my aunt saved every receipt. She paid taxes and wrote letters and kept green cards. She believed lines mattered, not because someone said they did, but because the earth remembered them. The cabins stay, the leases pay. The boundary is corrected, the forged document is rescinded. You'll get bills you don't like because good fences and bad mistakes both cost money. But you'll get something else, too. You'll get to look at a map that tells the truth. An owner in the third row raised his hand, then lowered it as if he'd reconsidered wanting to be part of the story. He asked if I was going to build anything on the rest of the parcel. I said I didn't know. I said I might put up a few signs with my aunt's handwriting on them, saying which meadow was which, because memory needs maps too. He laughed, and then he didn't, and then he wiped his eyes because laughing and crying are not opposites. After the meeting, 2 owners came to shake my hand and 1 to glare. The woman with the notes from the first night, her name was Alana, brought me a thermos and a bag of cookies, generosity always finding its way to carbohydrates. You turned a fight into fences, she said. Not everyone can do that. It wasn't just me, I said. Judges and surveyors and clerks and my aunt's habit of never throwing away anything that looked like government. Receipts, she said, smiling. Receipts, I said. The next weeks were paperwork in motion. The leases recorded, each with a diagram showing a footprint drawn on a survey as carefully as a tattoo. The title company issued endorsements. The receiver released funds that whispered of nights rented on air I now leased like oxygen. The county updated the plat, scratched out a wrong line and drew a right one, then made the ink official. The assessor adjusted values. The board paid its lawyers. The developer sold his stake to a company with a bland name and a policy of not answering phones. One morning, I walked the boundary with the surveyor as the sun laid itself like a ribbon on the meadow. We found the stone at the corner and the iron pin my grandfather and the old surveyor had set. We stood a while, 2 figures watching a line no one else could see without maps. He showed me how a bearing whispered even when wind talked louder. You did well, he said. People think surveyors settle arguments. We don't. We just point. I'll take pointing, I said. It beats wandering. I kept a copy of everything in a metal box and another copy in a cloud. I made a file named after my aunt and stored in it a scan of her note and a photo of the peaches and the jar labeled Early Frost. I sent the last check to the lawyer with an extra note that said thank you without any emojis because that word is heavy enough to stand on its own. On a Saturday, I parked by the chain that no longer had a private community sign, but one that said Pine Trail Cabins, leased land, with a small plaque below that read, Boundary realigned by agreement recorded book 617, page 44. Respect the land you enjoy. 2 kids on bikes rode past me and waved. The universal human act of trying without trying. On a deck above the slope, a woman watered a hanging basket. Water fell in a thin curtain and did not care which side of the line it landed on. I hiked up the trail that cut along the boundary. The cabins hummed with quiet life, coffee, laughter, a dog barking at a squirrel that had never read a plat in its life. At the top, a view fanned out that could make a stranger forgive 1,000 mistakes and forgive none. Somewhere below the mountain's calm, there was a county server with a PDF of a plat that now told the truth. Somewhere in a drawer, there was a stack of green cards with names on lines. Somewhere in a safe, a deed slept with stamps like medals. Standing there, I realized what had been gnawing at me since the first flight circled and the roofs winked. I had come back not to fight but to count. To count stones and feet and years and receipts, to tally in one place what had spilled into too many. We make fences, we draw lines, we stamp paper because our lives are short and land is long. We try to trap memory in ink so our children know where to plant and where to stop planting. We pretend the earth won't mind, but it minds in the softest way by telling the truth over and over, under anyone's boots, under anyone's plans. On my way back down, I passed the new information board the HOA had installed. There, behind glass, were 3 things. The new plat, a photo of the cornerstone, and a short paragraph about the Carver family that mentioned my aunt by name. Someone had added a sentence in a different font, a little crooked, perhaps typed by a person who still feared spell check. It said, "We got it wrong, and we fixed it." I stopped at the gate and looked back. The cabins looked like pen marks under an editor's note. I put my hand on the post where the chain had hung and thought of my aunt's pencil tracing the borders of a recipe, forgiving where it spilled, careful where it mattered. The mountain stood utterly indifferent and wholly faithful. A car slowed beside me. An owner I'd seen at the meeting rolled down his window. "Hey," he said, sheepish, If you ever do build something up there, maybe put a small bench? My wife? She'd like the spot to sit with that view. I'll think about it, I said. Maybe with a plaque for the person who taught me to save every receipt, he smiled. She sounds like a handful. She was an inventory, I said. I drove back to the farmhouse, back to the safe, back to the box with its weight that meant I could sleep. The drawers of paper and the hills of granite were finally at last in agreement. The cabins would hum, the leases would tick, the board would learn to read instruments before gaveling. And when storms came and knocked out power and the neon sign flickered in the wind, the cornerstone would not move a hair. People love stories where the bad guys get hauled away and the good guys ride off. Our story didn't have that kind of symmetry. It had signatures and checks and a meeting where a man said sorry and meant it just enough. It had a judge who used law like a level and a surveyor who used it like a lens. It had a mountain that did not care and a family that did. It had a folder that opened like a mouth and spoke in stamps. It had a title that sounded like a threat and turned out to be a promise. It had a moral, if that's still allowed. Not that receipts beat threats, though they do. Not that lines matter, though they do. But that memory, in ink or iron or the curve of a hill, will be the last witness. I stood on the porch and watched evening fold into place. The safe was shut. The emails were answered. The mediator had probably gone fishing. Somewhere a kid was peddling the boundary into a story about a bike ride. And on an office wall in the county recorder's office, the old clock still read 11:42, frozen at a minute that didn't belong to anyone. I went inside and wrote a note in the spiral notebook, in blue pen, next to the last receipt. Boundaries corrected, leases recorded, paid in full. Then I tore off a page and taped it to the inside of the safe. Receipts, I wrote, and closed the door. If you like the story, be sure to subscribe and share this video with your friend. Write in the comments, what would you do in his place?